Oh, Travis Wayne Goodsill. I just cut my hair last week and already I'm having a bad hair day. Alright, well, we got breaking news. For me anyway. Since 2019, with the publication of a Mormon's book on Brigham Young. His book has been used to alter Wikipedia. And so we've got some breaking news on the rewritten life of Brigham Young. And I need to rewriting Brigham Young. Promoting faith over truth. Just so I don't forget the title. There are ways in which people say things and write things that lead people astray if you don't just give the facts. Wikipedia is supposed to be for a factual presentation of evidence and actual facts, which is why they require source references. And so if you're putting in authors as your source for information, that's called hearsay, and it's not acceptable in the academic community. And it shouldn't be acceptable for Wikipedia. Nonetheless, for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Wikipedia lets it slide. Whether that's because they have Mormons or whether they don't bother to check because it's a religion, I don't know. But for example, under Brigham Young on Wikipedia, you see his picture, the name is up at the top, and then below is Brigham Young about 1870 for the picture. And then it says, second president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, if you're a Mormon of the Brighamite branch, oh, notice I said branch, then you don't see anything wrong with that. If you're a member of the Community of Christ or among Sidney Rigdon's Church of Christ, or I think Whitmer still has, his congregation still exists, maybe. Yeah, any other successors from Joseph Smith, not from Brigham Young, are offended by this. They're outraged by this. They disagree with this. And this is what Wikipedia is not reining in on. Because he's the first president of his branch off from Joseph Smith's original organization. That is the correct academic statement. And they didn't put that there. The church will not let anybody else put the other corrected information in. And so, yes, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are rewriting history. And this Mormon who came out with this book on Brigham Young is adding to a further revisionist history of Brigham Young. We'll get to that in a moment. Out on my run, I thought of a hypothetical, and we're going to share that with you as we start this. Now remember, this is just a hypothetical. This did not happen. I hope it will never happen. So understand this. Okay, you've got a ward of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a congregation, if you're unfamiliar with the terminology in Mormonism. And it's a full ward, but there's enough residents in the ward boundaries of that community, that neighborhood, that if they were to all convert, you could easily split the ward into a second ward. And you have a full staffed operation of the ward. The bishop, elders quorum president, relief society president, because no more high priest group leader, right? So just the elders quorum and the relief society now. And hypothetically, remember, you have some elders who are not faithful. They are unhappy with the bishop. They want more power and influence over the ward. And so they design a plot in which they secretly go out into the community and loot, pillage, burn down the houses of those who are not Mormon in their neighborhood. And they plant evidence, because we have forensic evidence nowadays, to lead to the bishop of the ward as having committed those crimes. And so the police officers are arresting the bishop, and he would be incarcerated for a period of time. The police, despite the evidence, could not make a case and had to let him go. And then the elders would do it again and again, in the cyclical pattern of the police constantly arresting the bishop. And they know he's guilty. They're sure of it, that he's guilty, because all the evidence suggests that it's him, but they can't quite make that final leap to go through with the prosecution. And so while he's constantly being locked up, these elders are very helpful to the elders quorum president in wanting to be more actively involved in running sacrament meeting and other meetings of which the bishop would normally be involved in. And his counselors were overloaded as well, and so they helped the counselors. Though on occasion the counselors would get arrested as well. And these elders realized, okay, the bishop is not going to get prosecuted. He keeps getting away with it and comes back to run the church, the ward. And so they decide, okay, the elders quorum president finds out about this. And instead of reporting them to the police, he decides, I can't be a part of this ward anymore. I'm out. I leave. I'm gone. And so the elders decide on their own, because they read section 107 verse 22, that they don't need the stake president to call the next elders quorum president, because they've realized that Joseph Smith said, well, you have a vote in the elders quorum to make your new president. And so that's what they do. They appoint the ringleader of this secret combination within the elders quorum to be the president of the elders quorum. And so he's now taking over the operations of the ward. He's holding bishops' council meetings in place of the bishop when the bishop is arrested and locked up in jail, and excommunicating Mormons who disagree with him. No, the traditional practice is for the stake president to, well, you're excommunicated. You can't excommunicate me. Yes, I can. I'm the elders quorum president. And so you've got a contention within the church brewing now. And eventually, the bishop is not going to get convicted for anything. And so the elders quorum president now decides we have to murder him. We will never be able to take over this ward unless we have him murdered. And so he plots with his loyalist elders to have two go to his house. And they tell the bishop that, hey, the police are coming to get you. We're here to be with you to make sure that, you're treated kindly. And while they're there at the house, I forgot to set up the backstory on this. The elders quorum president also plots with the community and saying, we don't understand why the bishop isn't getting prosecuted. We empathize with you. We don't want you to suffer from the abuse of our bishop. He doesn't represent us. We want to make sure that he's gone for good. And so he plots with the neighborhood as well to have him murdered, because you can't rely on the cops, the system is broken, blah, blah, blah. And so the neighbors, there are a few of them who say, yeah, we'll do it. And so that night, or that day, two elders are there at the house with the bishop. They're waiting for the arrival of the cops. But before the cops get there, this mob from the community shows up at the house of the bishop. And for whatever reason, they had no access to cell phones. No communication to contact the cops, okay? And the mob gets there, they burst through the doors, and at the top of the staircase that leads straight down to the front door, the bishop produces a gun. He had a gun with him. He shoots, hits 3 guys, and they panic. They didn't realize he had a gun. They all rush back outside the house. And the elders, having found out last minute that he had a gun, manufactured their own guns. We'll just say for the sake of the story. And they were the ones who murdered him and then tossed his body outside, where the mob then finished the job, shooting him a whole bunch of times. The cops then come, the mob is gone, and the 2 elders are shaken, and the cops say, who did this? Oh, it was a mob. We have no idea who they were. They had blackface. and so the cops eventually arrest some of the neighborhood who had been shot and had shown up at the hospital, because you have to report gunshot wounds to the cops. And so those 3 guys were put on trial, and they were acquitted of all charges. Not them. And the elders quorum president, now realizing, oh, they've murdered our bishop, this is a horrible atrocity, I am going to take those of you who will follow me, and we're going to flee the country. because clearly the justice system is broken and we are hated for our religious beliefs and blah blah blah. And so he takes a group of followers and they go to another country, and there he kills off the indigenous people and establishes a kingdom that is not a part of the original organization. They are no longer affiliated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They are their own rogue church congregation, just like Jonestown. And that's the hypothetical. The story of Brigham Young is far worse than this. So let's take you to Wikipedia and go over some more problems than just being a second president of the church. When you put your own opinion, that is intended to manipulate the feelings of the reader or the listener, because you're not stating fact, you're not presenting evidence, you're giving your opinion, your beliefs, and therefore you can't be trusted because you're trying to manipulate the person you're speaking with. And the person hopefully should be wise enough to recognize that that's what you're doing. So let's go over the early life section for Brigham Young. He was the 8th child of John Young and Abigail Nabby Howe. They were a farming family in Whittingham, Vermont, which, if you check on maps, it's south and slightly east, or west, sorry, of where the Smiths were, and south and slightly east of where the Cowdreys were. When he was 3, his family moved to upstate New York, settling in Sherburne, New York. At age 12, he moved with his parents to Aurelius, New York, close to Cayuga Lake. When he was 14, his mom is dead, tuberculosis. And he moved with his father to Tyrone, New York. Now, these are all presented as if they're factual information. There's some problems needed, as Wikipedia apparently was at least concerned, because they're quoting from Alexander's book that was published in 2019. And Wikipedia is going, you guys need to put a page number here. You're not properly referencing this. But they're letting them get away with an author who's brand new to the publishing community. And so that's some immediate red flags. But so far they seem harmless. But this is the danger you face with Mormons. And I've told you about my brother. My brother, younger than I am, was in the next grade below me. He was an honor, he was valedictorian in high school, and high honors at Brigham Young University. And his situation was that he was able to memorize information for the tests. Because if you're unfamiliar with our school system, the method of teaching is students sit in the classroom, listen to the teacher quote from a book. whether it's a math book, a history book, whatever the subject matter, it's always a book that the teacher goes by. And the students, when they're tested, it's on their ability to understand the information from the book. And so some students recognized, oh, well, the teacher's just going over the book. I'll just, hang out in class and won't bother to read the book. Just listen to the teacher. Some teachers catch on to this and put questions on the test that they don't cover in class. For that very reason, to try to trick people up into making sure they read the textbook as well. But that's all it is. It's just you memorize material, you regurgitate it on a test. And my brother was good at it and was a high honors student, valedictorian for high school. He, after BYU, getting a bachelor's and I think a master's even at BYU, because he went on to get a PhD at the University of Michigan. And it was in sociology. And for his thesis, he wanted to do research on the city of Ephraim here in Utah. And so he got a place to stay in Ephraim. I think he lived with an elderly couple or woman in an extra room or whatever, and was spending his time in Ephraim interviewing people and doing research for his book. Well, when he presented his thesis to the whatever board there at the University of Michigan, they had some problems. He was showing his Mormon bias in his research. He was not applying the textbook information to do his research. And they weren't going to accept his thesis and thus deny him becoming a PhD. He then cried to his mom, our mom. I don't claim her anymore, but after a cry with his mom, whether he figured it out or she nudged him to do so, he went back and pulled the religion card on them. You are persecuting me for my religious beliefs and denying me my PhD and my thesis. And they caved and gave it to him. He then went on to BYU to be a teacher in sociology, which didn't last very long. And so he ended up he got a job working for the church, finding people like me who move after no longer being a part of the church. Which is how he was able to track me down, because he used his job to find my address. I did not answer the door. Couldn't believe they let him in the building. And so this is the cautionary tale for Mormons, that when you're doing research on a subject matter that is close to you, you've got to be extremely careful not to let your biases interfere with obtaining the evidence and the facts in the matter. Because the church will have it backfire on you. If you're unfamiliar, Mark Hoffman created the Salamander letter. It's a fraud. It didn't happen. It was not from Joseph Smith. I think we all know that now. Unfortunately, there's one particular author who's not rewriting a particular book that he did research on to help protect the church with this bombshell salamander thing. Mormonism and the magic worldview. The church was not happy with it, despite the good intentions of D. Michael Quinn to protect the church. And you're fired, you're excommunicated. And so, as much as Mormons think that they're helping the church, like this Alexander guy, you're actually causing damage when you allow biases to influence your work. But you can see that this book is dominating the information now about Brigham Young and his life, as Wikipedia has been changed now to reflect this and from the information from his book. They should not be quoting him as a reference source. He should be having the sources in his book with references for the Wikipedia person to go to and confirm and put that as the reference. That is what is called a primary source reference. Authors are not primary source documentation. And so this Alexander guy, who just published a book in 2019, all of a sudden is the church authority on Brigham Young. The consequences, and Mormons who have already shut me off and put a thumbs down are going to miss this crucial part that is going to destroy the church. Yeah, those of you who are still listening are going, really? Oh, this is cool, Travis. Tell us. What about Joseph Smith? When you make Brigham Young an innocent angel of light, the true beacon of truth, and he's just trying to help when the Mormons were persecuted for their religious beliefs, and you cut out all of the negative stuff about Brigham Young, or you put a twist on it to apologize. This results in shaming Joseph Smith. Instead of Brigham Young being blamed for polygamy, now Joseph Smith is blamed for polygamy, isn't he? Despite 4 times in the Book of Mormon where Joseph Smith Sr. and Sidney Rigdon, remember, we do facts and evidence, not faith-promoting rewritings. Condemn it. Are we just supposed to assume that Joseph Smith was going behind his dad's back, behind Sidney Rigdon, who was the first counselor the whole time, to be secretly practicing polygamy to justify Brigham Young doing it? There are so much evidence against Joseph Smith being a polygamist, even in secret. And yet, yeah, that's just one example. Translator is another one. And so, even if people find out Joseph Smith Sr. was with the New Israelites and they practiced polygamy, therefore Joseph Smith Sr. was secretly practicing polygamy too. Why 4 times in the Book of Mormon? Why a whole chapter in the Doctrine and Covenants on monogamy And what used to be Section 131, Joseph Smith talking to a monogamous couple, saying, when you're sealed in the temple of the Lord, you will be exalted and inhabit kings, thrones, principalities, dominions, and exaltations. But when Brigham Young put in Section 132 the year before he died, Section 131 got gutted. The chapter on monogamy, gone. Well, that's because Joseph Smith was secretly practicing polygamy, and that was his real intention. Really? Really? So this is the danger of allowing an author to rewrite Mormon history. It may be great. Oh, Brigham Young is now vindicated. He's innocent. Hashtag Brigham Young did nothing wrong. Yeah, no brothels, no human sex trafficking, no murder, etc. And it's evident in here as we get to. Let's see. Okay, at 16, Young's father kicks him out. He's on his own. At 16 years old, his mother is dead, his father kicks him out. Can't stand him, get out. They don't mention why. Just says at 16, Young's father made him leave home. Made him. Yeah, kicked him out. Get out. Well, why do you kick out a son? Because back in those days, sons usually helped work on the house to support the family. They were farmers. What's going on? Why does the dad no longer need a 16-year-old son to help him with a living? It says something about Brigham Young and his character that we're not being informed of. He did odd jobs, became an apprentice to John C. Jeffries at Auburn, New York. Worked as a carpenter, joiner, glazer, and painter. And then they're saying here, with the onset of the Depression of 1819, which apparently didn't affect the Smiths. Jeffries dismissed Young from his apprenticeship, and Young moved to Port Byron, New York. Do you understand how an apprenticeship works? You could at least let me link to it. A person who is learning a trade from a skilled employer, having agreed to work for a fixed period at low wages. With the onset of the Depression of 1819, Jeffries dismisses Young from his apprenticeship. Why would he get rid of cheap labor during a depression? Why would his father kick him out at 16? Because when you're 16, you're now able to help around the house with chores and stuff. 14 in Idaho, technically 12, but they allow 15-year-olds to get driver's licenses to work on the farm. This is essential information into who Brigham Young is, that the author, which, Alexander again, he's throughout this whole thing. Alexander is being used to rewrite the whole Wikipedia page, and it was done since his publication in 2019. And it was the end of 2019 when I saw it on Wikipedia. And I had written a comment about the title of the book that I was deeply upset with, and Amazon banned my comment because I had not purchased the book first. And so as a result, you have to purchase the book in order to trash it. So yeah, I'm not purchasing the book. I know it's full of lies by the title. And I'm not giving you the title, but I'm sure you can figure it out with what information I've already given you. And so we moved to Port Byron, New York. And they don't give us a time. None of this. At 16, Auburn, New York. So we'd have to do the math of when that year would be. And he was born 1801, so 1817. So he was the apprentice for 2 years. In 1824, so 5 years now are missing from his history. He converted to the Reformed Methodist Church. This was a period of deep reading of the Bible. This is what I'm talking about. This is intended to manipulate the feelings of the reader. This is an example of it. It starts off fine. 8th child of John and Abigail, farming family, moved to this place, mom died, father kicked him out, went to work with this guy as an apprentice, and then is no longer working as an apprentice. And then becomes a Methodist of the Reformed Methodists. I'm probably sure they're different than Methodists that Emma Smith was a part of. But again, I would have to check if I were to be doing my research here. This is just a surface review of it for you as I caught it this morning. And so you can't put that in here. That has to be stripped from Wikipedia. Because if you're now quoting him, you're supposed to put it in quote, rather than saying he insisted when joining the Methodists on being baptized by immersion instead of their normal practice of sprinkling. Then you don't join their religion. They're not the true church then if you believe in immersion rather than sprinkling. So something's wrong with this. I don't see a quote by Brigham Young. And I don't see a reference to the quote. Instead, Alexander. And so you can see the Mormon bias creeping in here. He insisted on being baptized by immersion. What does the Mormon church do? Baptism by immersion. He does not quote Brigham Young. He puts Brigham Young's own words in his own words. And we assume that it's from Brigham Young's words. See, I would reject this Wikipedia article just as Michigan wanted to reject my brother's thesis. And so Young was first married in 1824. Interesting, is she also Methodist? Miriam Angeline Works, whom he had met in Port Byron. And so we see Port Byron, we see a Reformed Methodist, we see Miriam Angeline Works, who's in Port Byron. Is she Methodist? I don't see it. They don't mention her. They don't have a link to click on with her. Joseph Smith eloped with Emma. She's Methodist. The town, Harmony, Pennsylvania, north of Pittsburgh, was a full Methodist town. You lived in that town, you were Methodist. The Hales were Methodist. So when Joseph Smith was staying there, he got arrested by the nephew of Josiah Stolz, is that the name? Working in the silver mine because of his rocks and a hat trick. Well, the nephew sued Joseph Smith for failure to produce silver for his uncle, and was arrested and charged a misdemeanor offense of $2.68 for being a glass looker. When the 116 pages were destroyed by Martin Harris, Joseph and Emma lost their firstborn son. He died. And they went to the Methodist Church for comfort. And the Methodist Church said, "What are you doing here? You're a glass looker. Your kind are not allowed." They had to leave the town. That's how they moved to Susquehanna River. Joseph Smith was denied involvement in the Book of Mormon from there on out. I've done those videos. I've done that church history research for you. That's where the facts lead the story, not the story lead the facts. And so it wasn't until later on in 1828, so not in the spring, either in the summer or in fall of 1828, we're not informed here. That's when they moved to Mendon, New York. Young's siblings had already moved to Mendon. Why are they moving to Mendon? What's going on in Mendon? It was here that he became friends with Heber C. Kimball. And there's a whole nother Messer splits from the Bugs Bunny show. Whether that's an actual German word or not, I don't know. Here he worked as a carpenter and joiner and built a sawmill that he operated. Alexander. But Mendon is correct. That was the previous information. And so in 1832, wait a minute, we're missing out on some stuff. We're even missing out 4 years after the 5 years missing. 1824 to 1828. We're unclear as to what's going on here. We do have information that shortly after the birth of their first daughter, and after 1824, they moved to Oswego, New York, on the shores of Lake Ontario. But not until 1828 did they move to Mendon. So there's missing information. Heber C. Kimball tells of something that happened in 1824, which has connection here, because Smith, or Young rather, becomes friends with Kimball. who has this thing in 1824, of which he talks about in his journal, which is misquoted. The quote from Wikipedia is not from his journal. The journal and the Wikipedia page are not in harmony with each other. There are some similarities, yes, but there's some differences. And so that connection all ties in here with the church history. See, we're at 1828. And already there's some problems because of this Alexander guy who's rewriting Brigham Young's history. And then we get to 1832. Wait a minute. What about the connection to the church? Oh, they put it in the next paragraph. Do this in order of events. List the facts. Don't try to tell a tale to manipulate your audience. In 1832, his wife dies. And he has 2 daughters. And they move into Kimball's home with his wife, Violet. In 1832, there's another woman in Kimball's life that they're not putting in anywhere. You have to go to the family site and see that 1829 he has a child with this other woman. And as you can see, yeah, he was still married to Violet. See, in the church, we call them wives rather than mistresses. I want a mistress for Christmas. Is she really a mistress if you're not married? I think they're called girlfriends. And here's where I got angry. By this point, Young had, for all intents and purposes, left the Reformed Methodist. You're supposed to put an S at the end of that. Otherwise, you have to put Reformed Methodist congregation. Becoming a Christian seeker, Methodist or Christian. Do you see what Alexander is doing here? He's condemning Methodists. Why? Joseph Smith's first vision. The Methodist preacher who attacks Joseph Smith for having seen Heavenly Father and Jesus. And you can see the Mormon bias here, particularly trying to manipulate the reader. And I was pissed. I am pissed. Unconvinced, really, that he had found a church with the true authority of Jesus Christ. I call BS. And here's why. This is 1832. As early as 1830, Young was introduced to the Book of Mormon. In 1831, 5 missionaries from the branch of the Church in Columbia, Pennsylvania, preach in Mendon. A key attraction of the teaching of this group to Young was their practice of spiritual gifts. This was partly experienced when Young traveled with his wife and Kimball to visit the branch of the church in Columbia. So apparently, when his wife was still alive, he visited the Mormon branch in Columbia, Pennsylvania, And they talked about spiritual gifts. What are some of the spiritual gifts? Healing. His wife dies. They took out why she died. The previous one talked about an illness that she would need to be healed for. Do you see what the Mormon is doing here? Alexander is covering up some vital information and putting his Mormon bias to whitewash it all. What we see here is Brigham Young joins with Heber C. Kimball because they blame the church for the death of his wife and for something that occurred in 1826, of which is tied to the 1824 event of Heber C. Kimball. See, this is exposing a whole new world of Brigham Young that I did not realize, because I can see through the bias of this Mormon who is dominating the Wikipedia page here. But if he is allowed to rewrite Mormon history and I get silenced with very few views, and then the church ends up having me murdered and my Wikipedia my YouTube page taken down, Mormons will not know the information that I see very clearly. I don't even think I have a Wikipedia page still. I don't think so. If I do, I'm sure it trashes me. Travis Wayne Goodsill, Wikipedia. Nope. Amazon. My book on me versus the church. Amazon. My books and biography. Pinterest from the UK. I guess he must have shared or whatever it is on Pinterest with some of my things that I put on there. I haven't been involved with them for 5 years at least. Here's case text, the actual lawsuit official filing. That was the 2019. No, this is the original one, yeah. My LinkedIn account, another Pinterest. Book of Mormon plagiarism is proof of this truth. So somebody's spreading that on Pinterest, where I bash Kwaku. I wonder who did that. Let's check. Oh, I saved it. Okay, it was me. Okay. But that was like a billion years ago. Alright. Why do Mormons follow this guy? Why was he advanced into the rank of apologist? Why? Oh man, that is hilarious. But yeah, I have the screen capture from his own video that he did, where he goes over the 5 proofs that the Book of Mormon is true: antiquity, glosses, wordplays, parallelisms, and consistencies. Oh, that is funny. I needed that. You see, you can't be an apologist for the church. It causes damage. You hurt the church when you lie with fallacy. If you think you're protecting the church, you're not. You have to be honest in all your dealings, even to get a recommend, Mormons. Kwaku, you're not being honest in all your dealings. Give back your recommend. Tell the bishop, confess to him, leave the apologetic group, which are not in harmony with the teachings of the original Church of Jesus Christ. Is there anybody listening to this? Are you guys, did you find that funny too? Mormons need to give up their temple recommends because they're not being honest in all their dealings. So, a mass exodus of activity in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for Mormons confessing that they're not being honest in all their dealings. Fox 13 News Utah's Max Roth has more on this story. I want to see that news story. Oh, dear God. Okay. And so, I think that's good enough for now, but let's get into when he joined. Young was drawn to the new church after reading the Book of Mormon. When did he get a Book of Mormon? As early as 1830, Young was introduced to the Book of Mormon by way of a copy by his brother, had obtained from Samuel H. Smith. 2 years, he was drawn to it. You have Parley P. Pratt, who reads it overnight and wants to be a part of the church. He's so enthralled with the book, he wants to join immediately. 2 years? Seriously? Yeah, I don't think he had any interest in joining the church. It was not until after his wife died, after they visited a church meeting in Columbia, or attended the church in Columbia, where they talked about the spiritual gifts of healing, and his wife is not healed, and she dies, and now he's joining the church. These are the facts. And we can start to draw conclusions as long as we keep to the facts. This guy is making conclusions that are not supported by the facts. It doesn't look like he had all intents and purposes to become a Christian seeker. It does not look like he was drawn to the new church after just reading the Book of Mormon. His intent purpose was to heal his wife, and the church failed him. And then he joins. And then remember that hypothetical that I talked about? Yeah, well, even though it was a hypothetical, it was based on a real story. And like I said, the real story of Brigham Young is worse. And here they're claiming during a trip that Young took, in November 1832, Young traveled with Kimball to Kirtland, Ohio, and visited Joseph Smith. During this trip, not visit, Young spoke in a tongue that was identified by Smith as the Adamic language. And with page needed next to 19, I'm willing to bet it's Alexander again. Ta-da! Yeah, so many things attributed to Joseph Smith by Brigham and Heber C. Kimball. So, alright. There was something else. Let's see. He officially joined the church April 14th, 1832, being baptized by Eleazar Miller. A branch of the church was organized in Menden. They took out the part where the church even has a whole article on their website about the early mission of Brigham Young. It was Brigham Young who went back to Menden with Heber C. Kimball as they violated the 2x2 because they split up, and converted all the guys in Menden, thus the organization of the church in Menden. And if you don't understand what was going on in 1832 in the church, because it wasn't until 1836, but that's not what I'm looking about. Okay. Beginning in 1831, members of the Church of Christ, Latter-day Saints, under the direction of church founder and president Joseph Smith, began to gather in the Kirtland area. In December 1832. Do you see what's happening here? They convert people, and people are gathered with Joseph Smith. They're not doing pocket community churches. In December 1832, Smith stated he received a revelation that called for the construction of a house of worship, education, and other. If you're unfamiliar with the event of 1826, Freemasons after that time were no longer allowed to call their lodges temples. They had to call them cultural halls. Sound familiar? And there's no Mormons listening. This was the whole intention. And if you don't understand the Freemasonry of the Smiths, you're going to miss what they were doing. And so I didn't even get to that point. I got to 1829 with the Smiths in my book that I published. And no, it's not an actual history. I don't have references. It's based upon my notes that I took. I told a narrative using the information, so I hopefully made that clear in the book so that nobody would think that I'm a professional author that should be rewriting church history, although they might want to consider confirming my information so that they can actually rewrite and correct the information. They'll have to use my videos here on YouTube because I do some additional information as well as, like this video for example, as well as make some corrections. I thought it was Coppersmith Shop for the book when it's actually Coopersmith Shop, and that has a whole new twist that I didn't see coming but made more sense to me. and helped enhance the actual history. So, alrighty.